Hi, welcome to Stonemont Church. Hope you all have had a good week and are getting ready for another good one. We're going to do something a little bit different this week, and we'll see how it works out. Usually, in the past, with a couple that I've done for the channel, the Stonemont Church channel, I've done it just alone and into the camera, as it were, into my phone, and we have our church meetings separately. This week, I'm going to try to combine the two. I don't know how it's going to work out, so everybody pray for me. Will you help me do this and do it right? It's going to be a little bit different, shall I say, thinking about talking to you all who are joining us by on the internet and talking with the people who are right here. So they are behind you all. For those of you joining us online, they are behind you all. No need to get up and turn around and shake their hands or anything. Just know that they're behind you. And the giggle back there was my wife. We're going through some tough times. There are a lot of tough times going around, and I really, if I'm looking around and not at you all, it's because I'm looking at the people here with me. We're going through some tough times. We all know people who have gone through some tough times. We're happy to have one of our members back who has suffered from COVID and that finally got through it. Nice to have her back here today. But so many people are going through some really tough times. They have tough decisions to make. Many over the last year and a half have lost their jobs, lost their businesses, many lost hope. Many are about to lose. Many more are about to lose their jobs. They're dealing with great issues of faith. We know what's happening by government edict. There are certain medical procedures that are being required. Many of us do not believe in that and are standing against it. This is going to have a cost associated with it. There are many out there who are standing up and in faith, willing to pay that price, that cost. There are others who are very, very confused, frightened, afraid of the future. Others are not. And the difference is faith. Now, that's what I want to talk about today. What is faith? What is it? Where do we get it? Where does it come from? Okay, now there's a book that talks a lot about it. And you all know that it's this one. This book is all about faith. Now, many will say, well, no, it's about salvation and all that, to which I would reply, and where do we get salvation? They would say, through grace by faith. And I'd say, exactly. So faith is what we're going to talk about. Some years ago, Dr. Robert Schuller of the Crystal Cathedral out in California, wrote a book. And it was called, Tough Times Never Last, but Tough People Do. It was a bestseller. Everybody bought it and gave it to everyone who was having a problem. People received it after a death in the family, after a divorce, after tough times in their life. And I never read the book. And so I won't comment on the book, but I do want to comment on the title. And that is, again, Tough Times Never Last, but Tough People Do. It's easy to be misled by that seemingly simple message and seemingly attractive message because we're raised in a world that tells us to be tough. Certainly people my age were told to be tough. You know, when we skinned our knee or when we were afraid, they told us be tough. Even now, not so much as before, but people are told to be tough. You're undergoing a tough situation, be tough. You'll get through it. You're scared of something, be tough. You're hurt, be tough. Well, that sounds good. And there are certain situations in life where being tough is important, but it kind of leads us away from what's truly important. And that is because it implies self-reliance. Now here again, self-reliance is taught. It's held up to be important, and it is. As for those of you who have followed me on the other channel, Integrative Preparedness, I talk about self-reliance. We should develop self-reliance so that we're able to function in a world, even when that world starts to collapse or turn against us. But we're not really, those of us who are believers, we're not really relying on ourselves, are we? Okay. Where I, like many, was led into preparedness by a calling to my mind and heart that I believe came as a direction from God. And I'm not unusual in that. Many people who are in preparedness today began because of that. But when we think about self-reliance, then it leads us away for what's really important, and that is reliance on and faith in God. And it's that faith. It's actually He who gets us through it. It's not us. It's He who gets us through it. The great stories of faith, if we look back to the very beginnings, back in the Old Testament, we see such a great example in Abraham and Isaac. I won't talk about that story right now, but for those of you who are familiar with it, you know that there's no greater example of faith than Abraham. We come forward more, we see Noah. Okay, Noah did not survive because he was self-reliant. He survived along with his family because of faith and obedience to God. We come forward beyond that to Joseph, the story of Joseph. Here he's sold into slavery by his brothers. He's taken and imprisoned in Egypt. He's thrown in prison because he was lied about. And then he is elevated by God to the second highest position in Egypt under the Pharaoh. And he then is responsible for seeing Egypt through 7 years of famine because of dreams that he was able to understand from God. Not only was he able to save Egypt through preparedness, but not preparedness that came from self-reliance, preparedness that came as self-reliance as a result of God's direction. So he wasn't only able to save Egypt, but he saved his own father and brothers and family who came to him, not knowing, of course, that it was him. That's another story. Many of you are familiar with the story. It would take too long to get into it now. So he was able to go beyond. It was not through his self or his toughness that he got through it, but through his obedience to and reliance on the Word of God. David is another that we have. Can you imagine if you're 12 or 15 or whatever, going out to meet a giant in combat, and he is famous for slaughtering people, and you have your little slingshot. Can you imagine that? And yet we're told while everybody, all of the Israelites were frightened, none would go up and stand against Goliath. That David, in his faith, stood up without any fear and met him. And did David defeat Goliath as a result of his own toughness? His own self-reliance? No. He relied on God. God used him for God's purpose. So those are examples that are given us and are easily seen. And those are heroic tales that children, we love as children. And it seems, because it's almost unbelievable, and we all have this idea that we want to be like that. We want to have that kind of faith. To be honest, most of us who are parents sincerely doubt whether we have the faith of Abraham. But we would like to think that we have that faith. Well, where does faith come from? Let's ask ourselves first, what is faith? And we go to Hebrews 11:1, and it tells us what faith is. It says, now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Okay. Now, a lot of people can bend that and take that to things that they want in life. Okay, well, I want this piece of business, or I want things to turn out well for me, or whatever. And so if I just have enough faith, it's going to happen. It's going to work. God will do for me whatever I believe he will do. Not so fast. Now, Jesus tells us that if we have faith the size of a mustard seed, which is one of the smallest seeds, we would be able to say to a mountain, move, and it would move. Who of you has yet moved a mountain? Raise your hand. None here in this room. If you have, please put it in the comments. We'd love to hear about it. That's beyond our ability to understand or to do. Why? Because we don't believe. There's a couple things that have to go into that. And one is the faith, the amount of faith. And so when he says that faith, such a small amount of faith would have that effect, well, we have to understand that it also has to be God's will. If God tells us, Steve, move that mountain, and I go, oh, Lord, I'm not real sure about that. Well, it's not going to move. But if Steve had the faith of Abraham, that mountain would probably move. That's what we're told, and so that's what we believe. But that also is really beyond our ability to understand. So if we go by this, faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Let's take it to a little more elemental level. When we were children, most of you were children, we were afraid of a lot of things. We were especially afraid at night. Those of you who have had children know this. You remember. You don't remember your own fears, hopefully. But we remember those of our children. When we tuck our children in at night for bed, they're afraid of the monsters under the bed. They're afraid of those unspeakable things in the closet. They're afraid of the shadows on the wall. There are things that they don't understand, but they're beyond their ability to mentally deal with. They're frightened. And so what do they say? Mom, Dad, Mommy, Daddy, would you stay with me until I fall asleep? And so we do. And that's why we stay in there and we read stories and we sing songs. And we stay in there until finally we hear that little snoring over there, right? And often that's when we have awakened 2 hours later and we find out, oh my gosh, I fell asleep. It's 2 hours later. Are they asleep? Yes, they're asleep. So we get up and we go to bed. Well, you see, why were they settled by that? Faith comes from trust and belief. And our kids, as they grow older, that transforms, that need for us to be with them in the dark and protect them against those monsters. It transforms itself into the simple, would you tuck me in? Well, they gain faith in Mom and Dad because Mom and Dad answered their request to stay with them in the dark. And then when Mom or Dad was there with them in the dark and they felt safe because they knew that Mom and Dad could beat anything. And then they felt safe and they went to sleep. And after that happened over and over and over again, they realized, I can trust Mom and Dad. I can trust the fact that when I asked them to save me from the monsters, they have. They have saved me every time. Every night, Mom or Dad has been with me here in the dark. And no monsters have ever gotten me. So their trust starts to build into belief. And now they don't just trust that the monsters won't get them. They believe that the monsters won't get them. Pretty soon, that belief turns into faith. I want to read from Psalm 27, just a few verses, 1 through 3. I'm going to read it through, and then we're just going to kind of parse this and talk about each spot. It starts, the Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, when my enemies and my foes attack me, they will stumble and fall. Though an army besiege me, my heart will not fear. Though war break out against me, even then will I be confident. Okay, let's go back. The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Merriam-Webster defines a stronghold as a place of security or survival. It's what we go to. You'll notice that it's not an offensive situation. It's a protective situation. Just as the kids didn't ask mom and dad to go fight the monsters, they asked mom and dad to protect them from the monsters. And so they hid in our protection. That's the same way that we hide. We find security in the stronghold of God. We ask for his protection. And then we are not being tough. We are not being self-reliant. We're being God-reliant. We are relying on his protection, on his strength. And we're doing it first through trust, then next through belief, and finally through faith. It goes on. Of whom shall I be afraid? Well, of course, the answer is nobody. Nothing. Nothing on this earth should frighten you. Or going back to our last message, should worry you. When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh, well, that's an unsettling thought, isn't it? That devouring your flesh. I had a friend of mine years and years and years ago that loved saying, he was on the sheriff's department with me. And whenever he got in trouble or got in kind of a crack, he'd just kind of shrug his shoulders and laugh and say, "What are they going to do? Eat me?" And it was kind of humorous at the time, but that's the truth. What is the worst that can happen? Okay. Well, they're talking about this there. When evil men advance against me to devour my flesh. Now, that's an interesting term there, because of what's going on right now. The things that are being forced on a lot of people in order to keep their jobs. You might think about the devouring of your flesh in that situation. When my enemies and my foes attack me, many are under attack right now, they will stumble and fall. Kelly and I have had a lot of situations. I'm sure that she had many before we met, as I did. We've had a number of situations since we've been together, since we've been married, and which we had people attacking us for different things, or taking things away from us, or big problems. I mean, I won't say life-threatening problems. I would say lifestyle-threatening problems. And attacking us in many ways. And in each case, both of us are fighters, I have to say. It took me a long time because I was always ready to go. As I've said maybe before, not on this channel, but people used to accuse me of having a short fuse, and I would correct them and say, I don't have a short fuse, I have no fuse. You touch a match to me and it's go time. And Kelly was much the same way. But I softened over the years, and I learned more, and I studied more. And as God softened me up a little bit and said, Craig, you may think you're tough, but you're not as tough as I am. And if you'll let me start to handle your problems for you, you're going to find things work out a lot better. And it was tough for me to do that for a long time, but I did. And as I did, I saw the truth in what he was showing me. Kelly and I both came to this conclusion kind of together. And when somebody would try to do something